how do you even start a YouTube video? Like, how do you actually even start a YouTube video? Because like watching YouTube videos, you kind of just sit there. They have an intro and you're like, yeah, that makes sense. But now I'm sat in the chair trying to make an intro. How the fuck do you make an intro? Oh, hi guys. I'm sat talking to a fucking camera. Are we being serious? But I guess these are my notes that I have on the recent chapter. It is leaked, so spoilers if you care about that shit, but I'm not going to show anything. I'm just going to kind of talk about some notes that I have about it. Obviously, this is kind of flimsy information because it is leaks, so none of it's actually confirmed. It's basically just translations. So until we actually get anything concrete, these are just speculation. So the chapter opens up with obviously France celebrating that they've just scored a goal. You see Charles jumping on Hugo's back and Loki's just kind of aura farming in the back. One of the things that I want to talk about with this though is that Charles, hear me out, might see a fifth level of dimension. And this is what Hugo's talking about when he's talking about fate. I am going to have to elaborate on this one, so just give me a second. But the running theory here is that Charles can see a fifth level of the field, the fifth dimension. And this dimension is where miracles happen, or can happen. So I'm just going to quickly go through my evidence. I'm going to make its own video to elaborate on this. This is notes. So obviously we see Charles in this first appearance when they're playing against Barcher. He gets the ball here. He makes a pass. Rin shoots and scores. They then have a switch where Shido comes on. Charles makes another pass. And keep in mind, this is the first time we've seen him touch the ball in both scenarios. Shido shoots and Shido scores. You then go over to the PXG game. This is the first time that Charles touches the ball. He doesn't actually touch the ball before this. Isigi blocks the pass. First pass, we see him activate his eyes this time. Then he makes a pass that seems like it's going to Rin. It goes over them, and these two are fucking confused. And it falls to Shido. Without going on a 30-minute tangent of why all of this is important, the one thing that I kind of want you to take away from this is that Charles might be the next generation's level of metavision. Think of it like seeing the place where miracles could happen. That's why he makes passes through places where it's like 99% cut off, because that 1% is the miracle area where Charles operates. His metavision kind of breaks down the place where a miracle could happen. And then on the other side, I'm trying my best to keep a lid on it. We are genuinely glossing over so much information, but that's why Shido is the other person that receives this pass at first, because I imagine this was a next level goal. I know this sounds like insane cope, but this could then explain why he gets 60 million for this goal. Because this goal kind of hypothetically only happened because Charles could see where a miracle could hypothetically be received, and Shido saw a place where he could hypothetically receive a miracle. The miracle in this sense is the pass. Charles is looking for areas where that miracle pass could go to set up the striker. That's what his vision is. It's the next level because it's kind of above, I don't know, meta vision? What level are we even operating at anymore? And that also kind of goes into why Charles is so young and why he's such a talent. Because this new generation can kind of see that next level. Places where miracles could happen. And then on Shido's side, that could then explain why Sai's interested in him, because he can understand where these miracles could be received. And it explains his talent so far. And it also explains why he got 60 million for that goal. And it also explains why this was instinctive. It was a reflexive goal because they both just looked for a place where a miracle could happen, and it just so happened to align. Again, trying my best to keep this short and sweet. But that's basically the running theory of why Hugo and Charles seem to be close, because he jumps on Hugo's back. And Hugo talks about fate. Again, kind of putting our tinfoil hats on for this one though. But if you then look into it, again, I skipped over a lot of information, but it explains a lot if that was Charles's vision. The other note that I have, one of my next notes is that Ryu, Nico, and Aiku all try to break down what just happened. You see Nico and Aiku kind of focus on the strategy, but then you see Ryu focus on how they actually did it, like physically did it. And the little note that I want to show with this one, I don't even need to go into that much detail, is that it's nice to see that we're getting this difference between talented learner and genius. Geniuses tend to focus on how a person physically did the thing they did, whether it was shot type, speed, passing ability, something like that. But then you see talented learners focus on the idea side more. How did they think to do this? What was the plan behind this? So it's kind of just nice to see that we're getting a lot of differences now between geniuses and talented learners and how they see the world. But then moving on, one of my other notes is that Karasu says that the goal couldn't be recreated, possibly hinting to Loki actually running away from something personally. And that was a theory I had obviously leading into this game, but I need to elaborate on that. But the running theory here is that Loki's in a very similar situation to where Nagi is. Both of them are scoring goals at levels they can't recreate, but the only difference between Nagi and Loki is that Nagi got satisfied off this. When he scored the 5-stage volley, that was kind of the end for him. He beat Isigi, that was everything he wanted, his ego kind of vanished. But in Loki's case, what if a character just kept running forward? When they feel this ecstasy of winning, instead of feeling satisfied, they want more of it. They want more attention. They want to chase this adrenaline rush. And although they keep scoring goals that are outside of their talent range, because they keep moving forward, they've not really had time to look down. So they've not really grasped the situation they're in. So they've not really been afraid in any situations. Does any of this make sense? So basically, in Loki's case, so imagine every goal that Loki scores or assists in where he uses his speed. That's technically, the level of play that we're at is outside where Loki is realistically. But Loki just so happens to just keep being able to go forward. Instead of scoring that goal he initially scored that was a miracle goal and feeling satisfied, imagine he felt that high because he's never felt like that important before, or I don't know, some backstory shit. And instead of feeling satisfied, he delves way too fucking much into that feeling of being that important, which then results in him ultimately running away from his actual problems. That's why we see Loki with a speed weapon. That's why we get this highlight specifically leading into this game. It explains why Hugo's talking about fate and miracles, I guess, because that would kind of come under fate, right? But the miracle part kind of comes from the Charles theory that I posted a video about. I say posted, but this is in a YouTube video. Listen, there's a lot of moving parts at the moment. Anyway, leading into this France game, we kind of have a focus on Isigi's mental state. We get this where he kind of like starts to freak out about being the best in Blue Lock. And Isigi's telling himself not to run away from that feeling and actually confronting it. I know Loki has a running weapon, so it's hard when I say, imagine Loki's running away from something. But literally and metaphorically, imagine Loki running away from something. That's why he's so fast. That's why we're seeing this character have such an initial high. Because it's the burst part of the running away. He's able to be a top tier striker at 17, one of Noah's rivals, plays on France, is responsible for the next generation, was on the World 5, was one of the NEL captains. This man's been getting it all, and I feel like that's because we're still in that burst phase. Because Loki hasn't been mature enough to confront any of these issues. He's literally been running away from them. That's why, again, we see the blacked out ego eyes when he's talking about small fries with nothing but topicality and passion. Because this is where Loki's ego thrives the most, when he's crushing people below him. If anybody catches up, if anybody actually sees his weakness, he's cooked, and he knows that. That's why he's so focused on Isigi saying that speed was the only thing he was good at. That's why it's on his mind so much, because he's never confronted this before. All he's been doing is running away from this situation. And he's kind of the opposite from Nagi, because he's either been not aware that the goal was outside of his actual range, or he was aware and he just kept chasing that high. But continuing on through my notes, because don't get lost, this is still a fucking video. Oh my god, even I'm getting confused recording this shit, man. But my other note here, and I'm not going to go into detail because I can't even open this fucking can of worms right now, because if I was to start talking about it, I would genuinely have to explain at least like an hour of information. An hour! But we see Ryo then kind of be the one to get everybody back on track and be like, all right, guys, it's not over. It's only one goal. Like, let's stay focused. Keep in mind, this is the first time that we've seen him since the Nigeria game, and this is how he's moving. Again, I'm not going to open up that can of worms because it's going to take so fucking long to explain where I think Ryo is right now. But the TLDR is, if you've ever seen an autistic person in mask, Ryo's kind of doing that now, but Ryo's not autistic. He's masking kind of what he's really going through. That's why we're not seeing him outside of games. We're only seeing Ryo with the mask on, and that's why his copy ability is kind of at its peak right now. He's operating on focusing on wearing these different masks and changing depending on the environment. He's not really focused on where he is as a person. Again, we're just gonna skip over that though. We then have an emphasis on moving forward as Blue Lock resets, and again, that's going into the Loki theory. I think Loki's been running away from something this entire time, and we're going to kind of see that crack in the armor before it inevitably completely crumbles. But we see Rin and Isigi kind of pass the ball up to each other, and then Rin gets pressed by Charles and the CDM. So NPCs might be an actual thing in this game. We might actually get useful NPCs. But that's basically just a theory. We then see Rin pass the ball over to Chigiri, and Chigiri is being kind of marked by Chappa, so Chappa could be a speedster. That might be on the table. Again, that depends on the whole NPCs being useful this game theory, because if we're seeing a fucking random CDM, we might actually see the NPCs on the France team be useful, because not only that, it's the France team. They're kind of obviously going to play players that do something in the game. So it makes sense if we see like another speed type defender now in Chappa. Because funny enough, actually, I'm not going to go into too much detail with this again, but the one time that we've seen Chappa outside of the PXG game, well, the Bastard Munchkin vs PXG game, he's all the way up front and he's like next to Rin somehow. So he could actually be a speedster, because you could have had a counterattack where it's Chappa running the ball up, passing to Rin, Rin shoots and scores. We just see Rin shooting and scoring. We see Ryo copying Kunagami's header to set up Isigi, and I'm taking this as kind of like the narrative information that Ryo is going to be Isagi's strongest soldier or strongest like weapon moving forward now, because up until this moment we've obviously seen Isigi use Kunagami to kind of fill in the gaps, but now he's got Ryo. Now he's got this perfect piece that can change at a fucking drop of a hat. We then have Hugo shuts down Isigi with logic the same way Sai does. So funny enough, this could be seen as Isigi fraud allegations, because he's technically not improved since when we saw him in the U20 game. He's added a new shot style, but that weakness is still there because Hugo exposes that weakness. The same way Sai did way back in the U20 game. But I'll elaborate again. All the stuff that I'm going to read about Hugo, I'm going to elaborate in Hugo's own video. But Hugo then makes an emphasis on crushing Isigi to cause a chain reaction. He says like, Blue Lock is a good team, but if I crush you, then the team's gonna crumble. And then the last thing that I want to say is that I was fucking right when I said that Hugo was going to operate as kind of like the next level Hiragi. Because if you look at how the characters operate, they operate fundamentally the exact same. It's just the topics they focus on are kind of different. Hiragi did focus on fate in a sense with tarot cards, but he was more so reading the person, because we see that Hiragi obviously kind of focused on fate because he saw people as like different tarot cards. That then plays into Hugo being the next level and actually understanding a lot more of it. Hiragi fell off because he didn't understand that people can evolve. Hugo isn't falling off because he understood that. He's the next level. He's the difference between them. But I think that is everything I've wanted to say about the leaks. Yeah, that's just my notes. But thanks for indulging my bullshit as always. Never stop updating your world's perspective. Drink water, look after yourself. Peace.